Hello and welcome to chapter 5. I just thought, I couldn't be outdone by Mr. Davis's cowboy hat, so I thought I probably should wear this too. So what we're going to do is we're going to start chapter 5, and this is actually a pretty short unit. Most of it is about sleep. But we're going to be talking about some other things as well. So really what we're talking about is consciousness, states of consciousness. We're going to talk a little bit about drugs, states of consciousness, and other things. But first of all, we need to figure out, what does being conscious mean? And you can see on the definition right here, it's a creation of a model of internal and external experience. And what you're going to start to see is what enters our consciousness is actually pretty dang limited. It's very minimum, but we'll get to that in a little bit. So what does consciousness do? First of all, it restricts our attention. One of the things that you really need to understand is that almost everything that your senses are taking in right now is being filtered out. Hopefully, all you're doing is you're paying attention to what I'm saying. You're not hearing sounds outside, traffic, birds. You're not feeling the chair on your butt. You're not feeling the clothes on your skin. You're not hearing you're just restricting it to one thing, because we can really only pay attention to one thing at a time. So consciousness is really, in a lot of senses, what we're paying attention to. It also combines what's coming in, sensation, with what's already in here. So we are comparing what's out there with what's in here. And in fact, a lot of our perception is what we expect to see. A lot of our consciousness is what we expect to see. So we are comparing what's out there with what's in here. So we're focusing attention, we're comparing what's already in our brain with what's out there. And then the next thing we're doing is we can manipulate the world. This is really, I think, what makes humans so amazing. And I'm going to pause and put on my real hat. So as we look at manipulating our mental models, let's take a look at what that means. Think about your house, the exterior of your house, and I'm going to ask you to really think about, what color is it? Now, suddenly you can envision that. How many stories is it? You can think about that. Does it have a front porch? You can see that. Does it have a fenced front yard? Does it have a fenced back deck? Now, here's what's interesting. What I just did is I asked you to look at the front, and then I asked you to look at the back. So you have a model in your head of a house. I can ask you to build a model of a house that doesn't exist. I can say, think of a 3-story house, and it's pink with purple polka dots, and you can envision that. Think of what you have inside of your brain, inside of consciousness. So you are manipulating the world inside of your head. You're creating a world inside of your head. That's pretty powerful. I don't know if you've ever thought about it that way, how powerful imagination is. A unicorn with 2 horns. You can imagine that. That's what consciousness does. Okay, we're going to skip all the hypnosis stuff because it's no longer on the test. We might be able to talk about it later on, but it's not on the test, so I just want to skip it for right now. Okay, I want to talk about levels of consciousness. This is an iceberg for a reason, because most of what's going on in consciousness is right down here. So we have what's conscious, obviously, right here. That is what we're aware of. That is above the waterline of the iceberg. Underneath is non-conscious. Now you're going to have to be careful, because there's non-conscious, unconscious, and pre-conscious. So there's 3, and you're going to, what's the way to separate them? So I hope I can at least help a little bit right here. There's the pre-conscious, and notice the unconscious. That's the deepest. When we think about subconscious, that's really what we're talking about down here. You might want to put that in your notes. We use unconscious and subconscious interchangeably. And in fact, in psychological circles, unconscious is the preferred term. I don't like that term, because unconscious is also, if I hit you over the head with a frying pan, I knock you unconscious. So it might make for a little bit of confusion, but just know, unconscious and subconscious are basically the same thing. So let's take a look. Now, consciousness we're aware of. Well, duh. I don't even know if you need to write that down, for crying out loud. Okay. And when we look at non-conscious, when we look at non-conscious, this does not involve, that's all this stuff down here, right over here, non-conscious. So anything that we are not currently aware of is down in the non-conscious. So unlike the consciousness, we can work on multiple tasks at the same time. That is called parallel processing. I'm going to show you a video, well, maybe I will later on. I mean, it's in a different unit, but they asked this chess champion, they say, how often do you work on chess? And he said, all the time. And during this interview, they say, well, are you working on chess right now? He said, yes. So he's talking to this other person, and he's working on chess in the back of his mind. So it really is amazing the multiple layers of things that are going on right now. And when we start looking at the unconscious, it's really interesting how much work your unconscious does. We'll talk about that a little bit more as we get on the next slide. So this right here, this white part underneath the surface, that is the preconscious. Really, a lot of that is just memory. It's not currently in consciousness, but we can bring it up there really easily. If I said, what'd you eat for breakfast? You'd say, well, I didn't eat breakfast. Okay, you remembered that. So that's not in your conscious mind. You weren't sitting there thinking, well, I didn't eat anything for breakfast. But when I asked you the question, you could pop it up into consciousness. So if anything that's down there in the preconscious, I could pop it back up. If I said, how are you feeling right now? And you went, actually, I'm actually pretty happy. You were not conscious of it, but I could pop it right back up. That is why it's right below the waterline, and there's a lot of stuff in there that I can just pop back up. It's preconscious, which means that it's almost there. It's before the consciousness, but it'll get there. Now, when we get to unconscious, this is really interesting. There's a lot of research. There's a whole book about it that I have in my classroom that shows that your unconscious mind does a lot of work that you are unaware of. One of the things that they're finding is if you work really hard on a problem and then you say to yourself, I'm not going to think about it for a while, your brain is still processing it. Even if you go out for a walk and you say, I'm not thinking about it, your brain is working. There's an autopilot there that works really amazingly. So it works without your awareness. And you know what? It's unconscious because if I asked you to find it, you couldn't find it. It is so deep in there, you will never ever see it. That's this part right here, your unconscious mind. Here's what's really interesting. I have Blink in parentheses. There's a great book by Malcolm Gladwell called Blink about the power of the unconscious mind in decision making. And they asked all these people who are art experts to judge these paintings on whether they were forgeries or not. So here's what they did in the experiment, though. They knew which ones were forgeries and which ones weren't. And they asked these experts to look at them and determine which ones were. And in the first one, they gave them, I can't remember, it was like 15 seconds to look at it. I mean, short amount of time. So you have 15 seconds to look at it and determine whether this is a forgery. And they were like, well, that's not enough time. They said, you just look and make it a split-second decision. And then they said, and after that, we'll let you look more closely at it and you can change your mind if you want to. Well, you can tell from the way I'm setting this up, they were actually more accurate on their snap judgments. In some ways, their conscious mind talked themselves out of the things that their unconscious mind had told them. Now, that's not to say you and I would be able to do that. Not at all, because we don't have the expertise. They have so much expertise sitting below the surface that their brain can make those really interesting unconscious decisions because they're experts. And then I think we've talked about the priming the old age experiment before, where they had people do a normal word unscrambling exercise, and then they had another group do a word unscrambling exercise that had words to do with being old. It was like retirement and gray hair and whatever else. They had all these things. And then they timed them to see how long it would take them to walk out of the building. And the people who had done the word search that was related to old age walked more slowly out of the building. What they had done is they had primed them to walk more slowly out of the building. Now, would they have said, I'm walking out of the building more slowly because I just unscrambled words that had to do with old age? Well, of course not. It is unconscious. So when we get down here into your unconscious, it's work and it's real, and they can find evidence of it, but you can't see it. But if a researcher looks at it, they can see your unconscious mind working. But what's weird is we can't see it ourselves in our own minds. Pretty crazy stuff. Okay, now we're going to start talking about sleep, and I'm going to let Mr. Davis take this away. This is going to be at least a couple of videos. There's a lot to do with sleep, but here we go. States of consciousness.